So we move on now to Lennie in section 5, and a very sad chapter for Lennie, obviously, because a lot of his innocence shown. So the first thing we actually see is obviously he's sitting there and he's got a dead puppy in front of him, and obviously he's killed it. And he actually questions it and says, why did you have to die? I didn't have to bounce you, so I didn't bounce you so hard, etc. But the idea that here we have to take from it is that he's killed something else. We know he's killed mice before, and now we know he's killed a puppy. So again, it's just kind of an indication of his strength and a foreboding for what's about to come. Again, anything he touches, he's likely to kill. And then we get the fear that he has from George. He says, now George isn't going to let me tend no rabbits. And again, mentioning the rabbits is really important, as I've mentioned before, because it shows how important they are to him. That's kind of his idea of the dream, being able to touch and look after something that is soft. And obviously, that just kind of gives him like a simple, he did kind of a simple kick out of. And then we have a reference to the brush and the command and the order of George's, that if anything happened, that's where he's supposed to go. This is really important from Steinbeck because it's actually reminding us of that whole get out clause or the safe space that he's supposed to go to. So it's going to give him a little bit more approval of what comes next, and also shows he's aware of some of the more important things, and that obviously gives us an idea that if anything does happen, that's where he's going to have to go. And it's obviously, there's a strange irony in him just kind of thinking that he doesn't have to go after what he's just done, and then he does something just minutes later, which means he does have to go. And then he kind of gets the idea of George. I think this is important because George here is having a go at him in his head, and he'll say, "You done it, don't try and put nothing over on me." And he kind of takes that idea of George. Now, the reason I kind of highlighting this here is because in the next section, when the he imagines the giant rabbit talking to him, the problem a lot of students have with that is they just think it's a bit out of the blue. Where's it come from? Well, again, there's probably dozens of times throughout these videos where I actually highlighted how important rabbits are to him, and obviously that's kind of his focus in the dream. And then here we have George having a huge go at him, and being stereotypical for George. So it doesn't coincide. It's not that strange that we've got the coinciding of the person who tells him off the most, someone telling him off the most, and the thing he likes the most. So we've got kind of the thing he likes the most telling him off is like the biggest self-inflicting punishment he can do on himself, and that's why that comes up. But I'll go into it in more detail when we get there. We've got Curly's wife coming in very quietly so that Lennie didn't see her, and so there's a lot of allusions in this. It could be the fact that he could have. There's no way he could have avoided it. It's actually her fault because she actually comes in on him in a way that doesn't give him any time to actually move himself or escape. But also on a slightly more interesting level, it could be a reference to the moment in the Garden of Eden where temptation comes in. And because it's being offered right there, and they can't see it coming, even though they're told to stay away from Satan, Adam and Eve in the garden, even though so they can't see it coming, so that's why they ultimately fall for it, because it comes to them in a different guise. And here obviously we've got Curly's wife coming in very stealthily, so he doesn't actually have a chance to leave or kind of avoid her in any way. So you could look at it like that. He does try and defend himself and say he's not going to talk to her, but he talks to her and not talking to her. No sir, I ain't going to talk to you or nothing. But then obviously he does talk to her, and when he's looking at her and obviously thinking about like what she says, and obviously just looking at her, he sighs deeply. So we get there the kind of the longing, for the touch and the kind of intimacy and whatever it is, the prettiness that he actually wants. And obviously from that moment there, I guess you can kind of say in a way that she's weaved some kind of spell over him, and we know from that moment there he's doomed because he sighs deeply, and it's kind of a giving up as well, giving up on trying to fight it, giving up on trying to follow George, giving up on anything else being important, and that's what he's sacrificed himself to almost. Curly's wife says to him, "Don't you think of nothing but rabbits?" Again, highlighting how important the rabbits are to him. And after, just before he kills her, we get this image coming in of the light lifting as the sun went down, and obviously the light they're lifting obviously is it could be like the life essence of both. Curly's wife and Lennie. Obviously life is about to leave them, just as obviously the sun, the life-giving element, is actually leaving the room. And obviously you can incorporate the idea of hope as well, leaving from there. When Curly's wife is talking about him, she says, you're a kind of nice fella, just like a big baby. This kind of gives us an indication of how simple and small Lennie actually is. in terms of his mind, obviously. She realizes it very quickly, so perhaps here she should have known better, and she should have been looking after him more rather than kind of teasing him. Maybe she'd have treated him slightly differently than she treated everyone else, which gives us some indication, that this isn't all Lennie's fault. Again, he just gets kind of spooked, and that's perfectly put in the next quotation. When Lennie was in a panic, and we know from when Lennie's panicked before, he just holds on, he just grabs things. And that was the case with what happened in Weed, and obviously it's the case of what happens here, but obviously this time he holds on in his panic, and he shook her, and he was angry with her, and he shook her, and her body flopped like a fish, and Lennie had broken her neck. And obviously that's a really sad attribution, and as he puts it down, that's the whole end of the dream there. It's the idea that he broke her neck. It doesn't just say it killed her, because when the broke there was obviously referencing a lot of things. Broke her neck, broke their dreams, broke Candy's hopes, broke the illusion that they were under, broke everything. And so it's a really interesting use of the word broke. And actually, when you actually look at this bit, even though it's not directly for Lennie, when her body flopped like a fish, that's exactly how Curley is described when he's in Lennie's vice, when his hand is in Lennie's vice-like grip. So that you could take it there, this is the only time that they have anything in common. They're both destroyed in some way by Lennie. Sorry, Kelly's wife, and Curley obviously suffering that. So yeah, and then Lennie just shoots off to the place that he mentioned earlier. Like I say, he shoots off to the brush, and even though he mentioned he wasn't going to go there earlier. So again, everything that kind of happens to Lennie there is just kind of, it's all signifying. We feel like we need to try and get away from it. We wish we could stop it somehow, but obviously the chain of events is obviously in place, and it's very well signposted. We know this is going to come because of all these things, and then there's nothing that anyone can do about it, least of all Lennie.